Welcome back to another Arwen's Meanderings, and we're here again in the back garden during the coronavirus lockdown. In my last video I was working on my Tohatsu 4-stroke 3.5 engine. Having never serviced anything mechanical before, I'm determined to teach myself how to service the outboard. You can access my last video, which saw me changing the spark plug and the engine oil, by clicking in the top right corner of the screen. If you enjoy what you see, then come join me and Arwen on our voyages by clicking the subscribe button in the bottom right. In today's video, I'm going to drop the lower part of the outboard shaft and change the impeller, which I'm dreading if I was quite frankly honest. I'll then change the gear oil and take the propeller off to check the shear pin, the prop itself, and that nothing's wrapped around the prop shaft. Okay, so let's start by removing this lower unit. I've made sure that the engine is in neutral, the kill cord has been removed, and I've got the shaft vertical. The first thing we're going to do is use a flat tip screwdriver to remove this plug here. So we're just going to push that in and very gently prise that rubber bung out. This is the shift lever bolt. My outboard has a forward and a neutral, so I've moved the shift lever into neutral so that the bolt is appearing in the centre of the hole. I'm taking a photograph of the bolts in both the forward and neutral positions because it's critical not to alter the height of this bolt throughout the whole of this process now. I'm going to loosen it using the wrench. Now, I'm not 100% sure how far you loosen it without it coming out. Okay, now the important thing here is to make sure that when I've loosened these bolts that this is supported and doesn't slip out. Okay, there's one supporting the unit here. Okay, and there comes the second bolt. Now this next bit involves us wriggling the unit out. Wriggle it, but not completely free. Aha. Now then, we need to ease this out very, very carefully, and okay, and that's now the unit out. Okay, so we'll take this across to the workbench and we'll give it a work. Okay, you can now see that I've mounted it on the workbench. I've got it sandwiched between a couple of pieces of wood so that I don't damage the paintwork. I've also put a very large tray beneath to catch anything because I am a butterfingers, I must admit. Okay, we're going to loosen the 4 pump housing bolts. Now, I don't want to break these if I can help it. It's really important when lifting off this pump unit, you want to try and protect the gasket beneath and reuse it if possible. I have got a spare, but if I can reuse the original then that'll be fine. Okay, I'm going to slide the pump housing up the shaft and off the end, and as it so happens my impeller has stayed where it is. Now when you do this, the impeller may be actually in the pump housing unit, and it is really important to look out for the tiny little wood rough key that sits at the base of the shaft. It locks the impeller in place. If you lose that, you cannot refit the impeller, so make sure you watch out for that when you do this manoeuvre. Okay, I'm just going to quickly inspect the impeller. First of all, I'm looking at which way the impeller blades bend, and then I'm just seeing whether there's any tears or any wear on it. This one seems pretty good actually, but now it's out, I may as well replace it with a new one. Right, I'm just checking this lower unit bit and the gasket. I've sprayed a bit of WD-40 and I'm just wiping everything clean here. There's a lot of salt corrosion in here. I'm not quite sure whether I should chip that off or not, but the water flow areas seem to be okay. I'm going to re-grease everything. When I read up on this, it said just grease it all. So, and that includes greasing the drive shaft bit as well, all the way to the top. Okay, here's the new impeller. Now you've got to remember to insert this little wood rough key, and I'm going to use a little bit of grease just to hold it in place. And there's a tiny notch on the inside of the impeller which lines up with that. I've greased the base of the impeller. Now the blades should curl anti-clockwise into the housing, and my engine spins clockwise, so I'm greasing the impeller blades to ease them into the housing. You could use fairy liquid instead, I'm told. Okay, so now I think we're ready to grease the inside of the water housing, so that'll do. So that's all ready to go. Okay, now then, it's time to reassemble everything. and I'm going to wriggle that down. Okay, there it goes, nice and easy. Now the key bit here is that when you put it down, you've got to make sure that those blades are going in anti-clockwise direction. So the key to this is to actually spin it as you push down. There we go, it's in and it's down solid. Those blades now will be going anti-clockwise. So now what we've got to do is tighten up those bolts. First thing to do is just to quickly put a bit of grease in those linkages, like so. Now that is going to go on this one, so we'll just grease that up a minute. And we've got to get this absolutely right when we put it back on. There was a set height at which it was at. And the other thing to make sure is that under no circumstances does that come off. We're now going to grease up these bolts and put them back in. We'll hand screw them in first, and then when they've gone in a little bit, we'll tighten them up properly. And remember to do them diagonally. Okay, they seem to be going okay. Okay, now's the time to tighten them up. Don't want to crack the plastic housing in any way, but then I don't want them to come loose either. Okay, I think that's probably enough. And we'll just re-grease all of that. And we're now on to what is going to be the hardest part of the day, which is getting all this back in place. The engine oil change and the prop change will be an absolute doddle after this. Okay, I've done all the changes, I've done the checks. It's now the tricky part, and I've been dreading this, which is tilting the outboard back up and offering up this lower unit. I've cleaned the flanges so that they should join up properly. Now the trick apparently is to use a screwdriver and a sort of wiggle and jiggle everything to get the water tube into the water pump housing as you're doing it. Feels a bit better. No, I haven't got that right, so somehow that's not gone in wherever it's supposed to go. I've got everything in finally. It should slide in now without any force. If there's any resistance, then I've got something misaligned and I've got to start it all over again. We're just going to, while we're here, take the propeller off. Just check and replace the split pin and the shear pin, and just check that there's nothing twisted around it. So the first thing to do is just to squeeze that split pin down a bit so that we can get it back out. Pretty much pull that through, and then that should lift off. No, I've got a vague recollection I may have done this already, because that looks new grease. Oh, I vaguely remember doing this a couple of weeks back, didn't I? Okay, what I did was I replaced the shear pin and I unwound. There was a load of weed around here, so I unclipped all of that and got that off, and then I've, as you can see, re-greased it. So that's all done. So we're going to put the prop back on. And what we'll do is we'll push a new split pin through, and what we'll do is bend that down. So that will go that way, and that one will go that way. Okay, so that's that job done as well. Right, this is another 10-minute job, which I've left to the end here. All we've got to do is remove this bottom bolt and have the drain pan ready. When I remove the top bolt, it's going to break the vacuum and the oil will drain straight out. There goes the lube. That should dribble off the skeg. Oh, that splattered everywhere, didn't it? Okay, that seems to be the very last drips of oil coming out. So what we want to do now is to check the oil. I suppose the best way to do that is to rub it between my finger and my thumb, and if it's gritty then there must be metal filings in there, in which case I need to take it to an outboard specialist. The other thing to do is to check whether that oil is milky or not. Well, that's going to be a tad difficult, given that it looks like the top of the head of a Guinness. It's difficult to tell whether that's milky or not. I'm glad I'm changing the oil, let's put it that way. Let's just have a feel. Well, I can't feel anything in any of that, so I think that's okay. I don't think we've got any wear in the gears. It's important to make sure that you use the right gear lube, and my manual says that it should be SAE 80 W90. And if I take the cap off here now, I should be able to just put that into the hole and squeeze it in. I have, however, bought a tube that you can attach either to a bottle or to a nozzle to help put that in, and I'm just going to see whether or not this can fit onto the tube there, and that can screw into that bottom hole, and then we'll give it a go with refilling. So what we need to do now is to screw this into that bottom hole, and this may be harder than it looks. That's better. Well, that should be. Doesn't want to go. Doesn't want to go at all, which is a bit worrying. I'm thinking that's a bit big, which is going to annoy me no end if that's the case. No, that's massively bigger. I should have checked that before I cut the thing off. I just assumed it would go in. So once we start squeezing this oil in, we want it to overflow out of the top. So we're now going to pump as much oil as we can into there and just keep squeezing it until it comes out the top. Certainly a lot dribbling out from somewhere. It is not going in. And keep squeezing until that comes out of the top, which it just doesn't really seem to be doing. I'm losing a lot of oil here. I just don't understand how that's not going in. Good morning. As you can see, I'm down here in the garage, and it's another day. I've come down here because the disaster of not being able to get the gear oil in has to be sorted. This is the offending hole. It's difficult to see in there, but I'm going to try and shine a torchlight in, and you can see that there seems to be something metallic about 8-9 millimeters in, and I can't quite work out what it is. I've been on the internet about what might be blocking the small upper drain hole. Some have suggested a bearing, some have suggested that it's a sheared screw. There's been lots of advice on what to do as well. Drill a tiny test hole and see if the air will come out that way. Another has been to actually disassemble the gear casing mechanism completely in case it's a slipped bearing. However, today I'm not going to do those things. I don't feel confident about it. What I'm going to do is take an idea which was suggested to me, and that is to drain out the engine oil. I'm going to drain out the gear lube, and then what I'm going to do is to put new gear lube in by putting the outboard engine onto the workbench, lying it down, and then tipping up the shaft end and using a syringe to dribble in the oil. We'll then seal the chamber, and because of the usage I do, which is only about 8 or 9 hours of outboard a year, that should last me a good 3 or 4 years.